Let's go for it. I just feel sick.
I know this isn't easy, but if you look too nervous in front of the jury...
Well, I'm sorry, but I've never been tried for murder before.
Come on, Matthew.
I can't do this. I can't.
You'll feel better once we get into the court. Matthew, I know you're going to take this the wrong way, but it might not be too late to do that deal with the CPS.
No. I'm not pleading guilty. I'd rather you taste up the forensics on that jacket, because that's what proves Steve killed her.
Matthew, it is essential that we concentrate on the trial and try to keep calm.
I'm nervous enough as it is.
All I'm saying is be on your guard.
I'll just tell the truth.
Yeah, if a defence lets you.
Oh, what do you mean?
If Steve's barrister is anything like him, he will try and twist everything that you say.
Go and sit in the court. I'll be fine. Really.
Good luck.
Thanks.
I'll be thinking of you.
Yeah, see you later.
Matt? Can I go in now, please?
If this is as bad as Ian reckons it'll be.
Yeah, well, you better watch out for Steve's barrister.
Oh, don't you start. Talking of Steve.
You see if your friend's still smiling when the brother gets life, eh?
I wonder where we sit.
Through there. There's a room for prosecution witnesses. But you better make yourself known to the usher. I think you're the first one out.
Can't wait.
All rise. My lord, my client, Matthew Rose, is, as you are aware, pleading guilty to the conspiracy charge. In order that this plea should not prejudice, however, the other serious matter, may I apply that the charge be put to the defendants before the jury is sworn? I have, of course, consulted my learned friend, Mr. Cherry, who is in agreement.
The Crown has no objection, my lord.
We'll deal with the first indictment now.
If the defendants would please stand. You are charged upon this indictment containing one count, for that you, Matthew Rose, and you, Stephen Owen, on the 15th of February 1999, did conspire with each other to pervert the course of justice by concealing the body of Saskia Duncan. How do you plead?
Guilty, Your Honour.
Guilty.
Mr. Owen and Mr. Rose, the sentencing for this offence will take place after the jury has reached a verdict on the second indictment of murder. You may sit down, if you'd bring the jury through.
Sure.
Defendants would please stand. You are charged upon this indictment containing one count, for that you, Stephen Owen, and you, Matthew Rose, on the 14th of February 1999, did murder Saskia Duncan. How do you plead?
Not guilty, Your Honour.
Not guilty.
If you'd be seated.
We shall now start with the case for the Crown. I shall ask Miss Mills, who is the QC for the prosecution, to make her opening address. Miss Mills?
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, there is one simple, undeniable fact in this case. On February the 14th, 1999, when Saskia Duncan met with Mr. Owen and Mr. Rose, she also met with her death.
It's coming now.
You'll be fine.
Miss Healy, if you'd like to come through to court.
Good luck.
Let's hope she don't do him no favours, eh?
Why would she?
Well, she used to be in love with the geezer. Maybe she's still got feelings for him, innit?
She's engaged to Ian now, Janet.
Say no more.
How did you first meet Mr. Owen?
It sounds strange, but He nearly ran me over in his car.
I should imagine that would bring Mr. Owen to your attention.
Oh, it wasn't on purpose. I was crossing the road and he hadn't seen me.
It's safe to say that your relationship from that point could only get better.
Yeah, he turned up at where I work with a picnic and a bottle of champagne to apologise. I wasn't that keen at first, but Steve can be quite a charmer. We started going out together.
Did the relationship work well?
I'm not saying it didn't have its problems, but yeah, it was starting to work very well.
You say it was starting.
Yeah, that's until Saskia turned up.
How did Miss Duncan affect the relationship?
At first, I didn't even know she knew Steve, but she got chatting to me and we became quite friendly.
What was Mr. Owen's reaction to this?
He was annoyed. He didn't really want me spending any time with her.
How annoyed was he?
Well, he got pretty angry about it.
Please, Miss Healy, take your time.
Thank you.
If we move now to the 14th of February, Valentine's Day.
Yeah, it was Steve's big opening night at the club. He gave me an invite and I decided to go.
What happened when you got there?
I went into Steve's office with him for a drink. We were getting on great. Actually, I was thinking of going back out with him again.
So, all was going well?
Really well. Then Saskia burst in. She kissed Steve and thanked him for sending her some flowers.
How did you feel about that?
I'd had enough. I just got up and left.
What was Steve's reaction to Saskia bursting in on you?
Well, he wasn't exactly pleased to see her.
One final point. After Valentine's Day, did Mr. Owen try to persuade you to go out with him again?
Yeah, he did.
What did he say about Miss Duncan?
He told me that she'd gone for good.
Did he say where she'd gone?
No, he just said that she wouldn't be around anymore.
Thank you, Miss Healy. I have no more questions.
Members of the jury, when a witness has finished giving evidence, there is then the opportunity for the defence counsel to cross-examine. Mr. Cherry?
Miss Healy, would you say that Saskia Duncan manipulated your relationship with her?
Yeah, definitely. And looking back now, it's a bit scary.
In what way? Scary?
Well, she must have found out where I went, and then she'd bump into me, as if by coincidence.
Would you say you were deceived by Miss Duncan?
All the time. She played me and Steve off against each other.
Did Miss Duncan give you the impression that she was obsessed with Mr. Owen?
Yes. It was as if she couldn't have him, then no one else would.
Finally, in all the time you knew Mr. Owen, was he ever aggressive towards you?
Never. And I never saw him being aggressive with Saskia either. He might have got angry, but there was never anything heavy or violent.
Thank you, Miss Healy.
My lord, a matter has arisen on which I need to consult my client. Would it be possible to rise for an early lunch?
I take it this matter is urgent.
It is indeed, my lord.
Is that the Maudley Hut? Prove anything? He was wearing the jacket when he killed her. It had her blood on it.
But it doesn't prove that he did it. I did say that we couldn't rely on it.
Well, get him to check it again, then.
I'm sorry, but we cannot argue with this forensic report.
Well, that's me, then, isn't it? That's prison for life.
We have a strong case.
I'm sorry, I cannot do this. I want to do the deal. I want to plead guilty to manslaughter.
Matthew, this is a big decision.
I don't want to talk about it. Just go and do the deal for me.
Why didn't you go and have a word with your father?
Look, I can't go back into that courtroom. Please. Go and do the deal for me.
Okay. I'll go and find Miss Mills.
Thank you.
Done.
Try not to look too pleased when you go back in there.
I'll try.
Pleased about what?
Oh, the forensic report's just come back on my jacket. There was nothing on it.
Yeah?
Yeah, well, that was the only evidence they had. They're never going to convict me now.
Well, how could they convict you?
Well, you never know, do you? I mean, these barristers will use anything.
If you didn't do it, what evidence could they find?
Can't you just be pleased that I'm in the clear?
You said it again, in the clear. I mean, I thought you didn't do anything.
Of course I didn't.
Well, why are you jumping up and down?
I don't know, my jacket might have been splashed with blood.
Steve, you're lying to me.
What is this?
I can see it in your face.
Look, sis.
And now you're calling me that, I know you're lying.
Hang on a minute. What are you trying to say here?
You did it, didn't you?
Jackie, please.
You killed her.
Jackie, come back here! Jackie, come back!
If I've served time already for hiding the body and conspiracy charges, then I'll only get 2 years, right? What's the matter?
I'm sorry, but it's no go.
It's gotta be.
We were too late.
You're going to change her mind.
Mills is adamant. She doesn't want to know.
Well, that is just great. I'm going to end up doing life.
Now, calm yourself down, Matthew.
This is your fault. You should have insisted that I did it.
Now, you listen to me. If you let me get on with my job, then there is a good chance that you will be acquitted. But if you don't pull yourself together, and quickly, Matthew, then you're right. You're going to end up doing life.
I remember her arriving, but she was there from about 7 o'clock onwards.
How did you find Miss Duncan?
I didn't have to find her. She was propping up the bar.
By this you mean she'd had a lot to drink?
Yeah, she'd had too much. She was drunk.
Did you speak to Miss Duncan?
No, but I could hear her. She was telling anyone who would listen.
What was she telling them about?
Well, about men mainly. What swines they are and how you can't trust them.
Sentiments echoed by a great many single women on Valentine's Day. So you'd say Miss Duncan wasn't in a happy state?
Definitely not. I felt sorry for her.
Why was that?
Well, she was a bit pathetic.
Obviously, I don't wish to put words into your mouth, Mrs. Butch, but you describe Miss Duncan as drowning her sorrows and being both a sad and pathetic figure.
That's right, yeah.
We know that Miss Duncan then went straight on to Mr. Owen's nightclub, E20. Would you find it hard to believe that the Miss Duncan you've described, shortly after leaving the Queen Vic, could have attacked and half-strangled a man nearly twice her size?
My lord, I object to this leading question.
I would find that hard to believe, but I'd find it even harder to believe that Matthew Rose would do anything to her.
And Mrs. Butcher, that is purely speculation on your part.
Well, she asked me if I thought Saskia could attack anyone.
The difference being that you didn't see Matthew Rose on the night in question.
No, but I know him and his family. And Matthew's a really nice lad.
That's enough, thank you, Mrs. Butcher. Miss Mills?
I have no more questions. So, what happened when Saskia Duncan went towards the office?
Well, Matthew stopped her. He stood in her way.
What happened then?
Well, at first, Matthew tried to reason with her, but, well, she wouldn't take any notice of him, so he pushed her away.
In other words, Mr. Rose lost his temper and became violent.
I wouldn't say that, no.
Miss Hills, you said that after trying to reason with Miss Duncan, Mr. Rose forced her away from him against her will. Is this not the action of a man who has lost his temper and resorted to physical means?
I suppose it is, yeah.
Thank you, Miss Hills. I have no more questions.
I have no questions for this witness, my lord.
Miss Hills, going back to when Mr. Rose tried to get Miss Duncan away from the office, would another interpretation be that instead of losing his temper, that Mr. Rose was merely being firm with her?
Yeah, that's how it looked to me.
And would you also say that Mr. Rose looked desperate to move her away as he didn't want there to be any trouble?
Definitely. Matthew, he hates any sort of trouble.
I can't... Have you known Mr. Rose?
Well, we've been friends for years.
And would you say that you know him well?
Very well. Matthew, he isn't macho like a lot of blokes. He's someone you can talk to.
Did you at one time have a relationship with Mr. Rose?
Yes, but we both realised we weren't right for each other.
Was Mr. Rose ever violent towards you?
No. Matthew wouldn't ever hit a woman.
Was he ever aggressive towards you?
Matthew isn't like that. He's always been kind and considerate.
And finally, Miss Hills, after February the 14th, did you notice a change in Mr. Rose?
A huge change.
In what way?
There was obviously something upsetting him. He didn't bother with his business. He even started drinking. He was just a different person.
Thank you, Miss Hills.
My lord, I've just received some information about which I'd like to ask the witness.
Go ahead, Mr. Cherry.
Miss Hills, you say Matthew Rose was always kind and considerate.
That's right.
But that wasn't the case when you and he got engaged. Well, I don't wish to embarrass you, but didn't Matthew Rose get engaged in order that you consent to have sexual intercourse with him? And then, following morning, he broke the engagement off.
Yes, but we both sorted
Matthew
it out.
Rose manipulated both you and the situation. Didn't he, Miss Hills?
It wasn't like that sounds.
But it sounds to me like Matthew Rose lied in order that you'd have sex with him. Then when he had what he wanted, he cast you aside. Is that correct, Miss Hills? Miss Hills, did Matthew Rose lie in order to have sex with you? Is that what happened?
Yes. Yes, it was.
Hardly the actions of a kind and considerate person, Miss Hills. I have no more questions, my lord.
Miss Hills, thank you for your attendance. You're now free to leave the court. Members of the jury, as it's now 5 minutes to 4, we shall adjourn for today. If I may remind you not to discuss the case with anyone. I shall see you at 10 o'clock in the morning. Thank you.
Steve! How can you do this to me? How can you stand there and let me take the blame?
Will you get him away from me?
Just tell him the truth, Steve, please!
Morning.
Steve?
So you didn't have any trouble getting over it then?
Traffic wasn't too bad. I'm only here to tell you that I'm finished with you.
No, you can't walk out on me.
After what you've done.
Look, you've got every right to feel like that. Please, just hear me out, eh? Look, sit down, Jack.
I believed in you. You let me go around telling everyone you were innocent.
Yeah, and why do you think I lied?
Oh, you're admitting it, are you?
Oh, come on. You turn up here after all these years. What am I supposed to say? Oh, nice to see you, Jack. By the way, I accidentally killed someone.
If it was an accident. I take it was.
Of course it was. I'm sorry. I just didn't want to lose you. You're all I've got, Jack.
Okay. I can just about understand that. What I can't is how you can do this to Matthew.
Only way out.
For you, maybe.
No, for me and Matthew.
If she was strangling you, why not tell the police it was self-defence?
You think I wish I had? I thought I'd listen to Matt and call the police straight away.
Why didn't you?
Because I panicked. You know, I couldn't face the thought of walking into a police station and getting myself locked up.
Tell the court what you just told me. Might not be too late.
It was too late the minute we buried the body. I mean, once we had done that, there was no turning back. No one was going to believe it was an accident.
So instead you blame that poor kid.
Matthew is not going to be found guilty. If I'm saying it was him and he's saying it was me, then there's no way that a jury won't have a reasonable doubt.
You think you're both going to get off, do you?
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
Well, let's hope you're right.
Jack, hasn't it occurred to you why else I lied?
I knew this was coming.
No, this is true. I didn't want to end up like Doug. Just give me 2 seconds. I swear to you, Jack, I'm telling you the truth.
I can't believe a word you say anymore.
You will do your best from behind the piece.
What do you mean?
Make him look as good as you can.
Look, just because you messed up doesn't mean I'm going to commit perjury for you.
Thank you.
You should just ask me to make things look good for Matthew. Well, that's what I'll be doing, Terence.
Yeah, of course you can.
I didn't think you'd be speaking to me after yesterday.
That wasn't your fault.
Thanks, Michael. So how is Matt?
Well, he was upset last night. But he's not bright this morning.
How are you feeling? Fine? No problems?
You going to tell them the truth?
Right, Matthew.
The jury, some x-rays and photographs have been taken of Miss Duncan's injuries. You may find these unpleasant, but it is important that you understand the pathologist's evidence.
Dr. Saunders, if you could explain the cause of death.
The cause of death was cerebral contusion and fractured skull. As you will see on photograph A, there was a single blow to the right side of the temple which pierced the skull and caused severe bruising to the brain.
How much force was used to hit Miss Duncan?
To fracture the skull in such a way, the blow must have been struck with considerable force. I think that death would have been almost instantaneous.
Mum?
Opening up early to sort out the morning papers. I run my own news agents, you see, and I saw Steve and Matthew putting something in the boot of Steve's car.
Which we now know was the body of Miss Duncan.
Well, I wasn't really taking much notice. I offered to give them a hand.
Did either of the defendants respond?
Steve said they could manage. I made some joke or other about getting rid of rubbish. Steve made a joke back about council bin men, and then I went in the shop.
How did Mr. Owen and Mr. Rose seem to you?
Well, they both seemed calm. They were acting naturally.
Thank you, Mr. Raymond. I have no more questions.
Excuse me. Mr. Raymond, if you could return to the witness box to be cross-examined.
Sorry, Your Honour.
Mr. Raymond, good to have you back. By your own admission, you weren't taking much notice of Mr. Owen or Mr. Rose. Therefore, how did you know they were acting calmly?
Well, because they weren't doing anything out of the ordinary. Well, they were, but it didn't look like they were.
I think I'm with you. You said you made some joke or other to Mr. Owen, but he denies speaking to you.
Oh, I spoke to him all right.
Could you be clearer about his response?
Well, I can't remember word for word. It's just some joke about bins.
So, to recap, Mr. Raymond, you weren't taking much notice, you can't remember exactly what you said, and you don't remember what was said to you.
Yeah, but it's not like that sounds.
Thank you, Mr. Raymond. If you stayed there.
Mr. Raymond, when you spoke to the defendants, did Mr. Rose respond at all?
No, Matthew just kept his head down.
And remained silent?
That's right.
Could another interpretation be, therefore, that rather than being calm, Mr. Rose kept his head down and remained silent because he was distressed at having witnessed a murder and having been warned to keep his mouth shut?
Yeah. I'd say it could.
Thank you, Mr. Raymond.
Thank you for your attendance. You are now free to leave the court.
Your Honour.
Mr. Owen when he insisted that he hadn't had a relationship with Saskia?
Not exactly. Saskia had sent me an email saying they were back together. I was worried he'd rejected her and she'd gone off to do something stupid.
What did you do?
A couple of weeks went by and I didn't hear anything, so I reported her to the police as a missing person.
The police made inquiries?
Yes. But obviously they didn't find anything. They said they'd keep looking.
Then I believe some months went by.
It was May that I got a call from the police. A woman had been found matching Saskia's description in Scotland, suffering from amnesia.
What was your response?
I said that I'd go straight up there. But first I went to tell Steve the news. He said he'd come to Scotland with me.
I know this must be very distressing for you, Mrs. Fielding, but even though Mr. Owen had disposed of your sister's body, he still came with you to look for her?
Yes. It's very good of him.
I believe you travelled with Mr. Owen in your car. What was his manner like?
Steve was very calm about everything. In fact, when we saw the woman and it wasn't Saskia, I got upset and he even offered me a shoulder to cry on.
Thank you, Mrs. Fielding.
Mrs. Fielding, Would I be right in saying that you've never held my client, Mr. Owen, in particularly high regard?
It's ridiculous. You're trying to say I've made all this up just because I never liked Steve?
So you do admit you'd never liked Mr. Owen?
No, I haven't.
Thank you, Mrs. Fielding.
And all this does is prove that I was right about him.
Someone told me that Saskia Duncan had visited him on a couple of occasions. She then left Walford without telling him where she was going.
Were you satisfied by his response?
Not at all. You see, he was unaware that while searching Miss Duncan's flat, I found a message from him on her answer machine which was of a threatening nature. I later asked him to accompany me to the station to answer further questions.
DCI Mason, I'm now holding up Exhibit S4. Is this the cassette from Saskia Duncan's answering machine?
It is.
If your lordship will permit, I'd now like to play this message to the jury.
Go ahead, Miss Mills.
Saskia, you stop telling lies about me. You get out of my life and leave my friends alone.
What was Mr. Owen's response to this evidence?
Well, he was very quick to change his story. He said that Miss Duncan was obsessed with him, that she was stalking him, that she tried to split him and his girlfriend up.
This being Melanie Healy?
And that's correct.
What was Mr. Owen's manner during these interviews?
Well, I would say he's a very cool customer.
Thank you, Detective Chief Inspector.
Just one point. Detective Chief Inspector Mason. On both the occasions you interviewed my client, he was never under arrest or caution.
That's correct.
He was therefore under no legal obligation to speak with you.
Yes, but that doesn't alter the fact that he told me a pack of lies.
Mr. Rose insisted that since Miss Duncan's death, he'd been terrified of Mr. Owen, who'd forced him into remaining silent. However, investigations soon proved otherwise.
If you could explain, D.I. Steele.
Rather than display a terror of Mr. Owen, Mr. Rose continued DJing for him at the nightclub.
Did you discover any other evidence that they'd remained close?
Yes, indeed. They'd been seen frequently socializing together. In fact, Mr. Rose received money from Mr. Owen on a regular basis.
This wasn't for work he'd carried out?
Certainly not. Mr. Owen liked to look after Mr. Rose.
What was Mr. Rose's manner when you interviewed him?
He lost his temper and became aggressive with me.
Did you discover any motive for Mr. Rose to strike the blow that killed Miss Duncan?
The only motive could be found in their relationship. Mr. Rose hero-worshipped Mr. Owen. I would suggest that if Mr. Owen had a problem, Mr. Rose would be more than willing to sort it out for him.
Jackie, you all right?
I'll be okay in a minute.
There's some tissues in here somewhere. Here.
Take no notice of me. I'm just being stupid.
Oh, no, you're not. Come and sit down and tell me what the matter is.
In the 4 months after the killing, Mr. Rose remained in Walford, even working at the scene of where the killing took place. However, as soon as Miss Duncan's body was found, Mr. Rose fled.
How soon after was this?
He learnt about it late one night on the local news and was gone the next day. He took with him his girlfriend and one of Mr. Owen's credit cards.
He stole the credit card?
That's correct. He used it to steal money from Mr. Owen's bank account, which I should add was never reported to the police.
Finally, Detective Inspector, were you suspicious of Mr. Rose's statement blaming Mr. Owen for the killing?
I was indeed. If the defendants are to be believed, they both decided independently to contact a police station within the same 24 hours. Then they each insisted they were the innocent party in Miss Duncan's killing, and both gave evidence against the other as being the killer.
You'd say that that was quite a coincidence.
Quite a coincidence indeed.
Sorry for losing it before.
You're bound to be upset. Looking at your brother in the dock.
Thanks for your evidence yesterday.
I just told the truth. Looking back now, though, Saskia was really scary.
Still didn't deserve to die. Funny she'd left you and Steve alone, eh?
Yeah. Look, I better be getting back now. You take care, yeah?
What happened when you got to Nottingham?
We drove around town, but then we couldn't find them.
What was Mr. Owen's mood by this time?
He was going nuts. He kept wanting to split up and find them himself, but I refused. You see, I didn't want him getting to them first.
Why was that?
Well, I was worried what he'd do. And not just for Matthew, but my little sister was there and all.
You feared for their safety.
Steve was desperate. It was obviously about a lot more than a stolen credit card.
Did you voice these concerns?
I did. I even asked him if it was about the murder inquiry.
What was his response?
There wasn't any. He just got more aggressive, so I thought it was best if I didn't push it, you know?
Did you continue searching?
No. Because we found out that Steve's card had been used to book 2 flights to Italy in the morning. We decided to stay overnight and get him at the airport. We found a hotel, had a few drinks. That's when Steve started talking about Saskia.
What did he say about Miss Duncan?
He said he regretted they broke up, how terrible it was she was dead. I think he just seemed to be playing on his mind.
What happened then?
I went to sleep in my room. Steve found my sister in the same hotel and started knocking her about all over the place.
Mr. Cherry?
My lord, I must object to the witness' last statement.
I do agree, Miss Mills. Mr. DeMarco, if you could confine your evidence to what you actually saw or heard personally.
Sorry, Your Honour.
Did Mr. Owen tell you that he'd seen Mr. Rose and your sister at the hotel?
No, he didn't. I saw him the next morning with a black eye, so I asked him what had happened. He told me he bumped into a door.
So, you went to wait for them at the airport?
Yes, but thankfully they didn't turn up.
You say thankfully.
Well, Steve was like a madman. If he'd got his hands on them...
Quite. What was Mr. Owen's response when they didn't turn up?
I've never seen anyone more panicked in my life. He completely lost it. That's when he phoned up the police and reported Matthew for murdering Saskia.
Did you question him about this?
No. I thought it was safer to play along with what he wanted.
You're saying you now feared for your own safety?
Absolutely. Steve was possessed. He was capable of anything.
Thank you, Mr. DeMarco.
Mr. DeMarco, my client, Mr. Owen, insists that he was desperate on this trip because of his deep concern for Mr. Rose. He wanted to talk him into handing himself into the police before it was too late. Could the desperation you describe not stem from this concern?
Well, I suppose it could, but if you ask me, Matthew's welfare was the last thing on Steve's mind.
Thank you, Mr. DeMarco.
Mr. DeMarco, just one question. Did Mr. Owen say that he was actually going to harm Matthew Rose?
Yes, he did. I said he should report his card stolen to the police. He said not to worry, he wanted to sort him out himself.
Thank you, Mr. DeMarco.
Thank you for your attendance. You're free to leave the court.
My lord, that concludes the case for the prosecution.
Go on in. And I've given Steve what for, and Claudia did. I mean, the jury's bound to think Steve did it.
We've still got a long way to go. We can't afford to start relaxing now.
No, I know that. Just can't help feeling better about it.
I'm glad to hear it. Now, you get a good night's sleep. Ready to do battle again in the morning.
Will do.
Good night, Matthew.
Night.
Let's...
Morning, T.
Steve, today's the big one. I take it you're ready?
More than ready.
A word of advice. The average juror isn't made of the same stuff as you.
Meaning what?
This is what you've been waiting for. A chance to tell your side of the story. You can't afford to look too cool.
A bit more emotion.
It wouldn't go amiss.
Emotion it is.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my client, Mr. Owen, does not deny that he's done wrong. He deeply regrets hiding Miss Duncan's body. He knows he should have reported this terrible crime as soon as it happened. So, why does he stand before you today? When Mr. Owen arrived in Walford, he soon befriended a troubled young man whose parents had deserted him, Matthew Rose. My client started to look after Matthew. Matthew began to rely on my client. very soon, Mr. Owen had become the father figure in Matthew Rose's life. Now, I suggest that Mr. Owen stands before you today because Matthew Rose had become the son he'd always wished for. And when Matthew Rose killed Saskia Duncan, my client couldn't face the thought of handing him over to the police to be sent to prison. He preferred to lie and to break the law in order to stop Matthew Rose's life from being destroyed, as he will now explain to you. I call Mr. Stephen Owen as my first witness. He didn't seem settled in Walford.
Yeah. It wasn't long after buying the club that I had new friends, a whole new way of life. I felt as if I'd come home.
Mr. Owen, a nightclub can conjure up the image of a shadowy underworld figure.
Not at all. It was a friendly, respectable club. You know, I even ran salsa classes to give the local pensioners a good night out.
How soon after arriving in Walford did you meet Matthew Rose?
He was about one of the first people I spoke to. You know, we got chatting. We're both into music. Both liked the same bands.
You became friends?
Yeah, I like Matt. He seemed like a great kid. I felt sorry for him.
Sorry for him?
Yeah, his parents were moving away from the area. He was finding it hard to cope. I thought I'd give him a break.
How did you do that?
Matt kept hanging around the club. He seemed pathetic. He wasn't a professional or anything, but I decided to let him DJ.
Why was that?
To give him back some self-respect. You know, he was at a low point. I just wanted to show him that. Someone cared.
What idea was it to bury Miss Duncan's body?
I'm sorry to say it was mine. It sounds unbelievable now, but Matt never meant to. You know, he was standing there. He was shocked. He was distraught. I had to do something to help him. I mean, he'd only done it to stop her from killing me.
Would you say you panicked?
Yeah, at first. But Saskia was just lying there on the floor. I mean, no matter how much trouble she'd caused, I had once loved her. And I thought to myself, one life's already been ruined. Why ruin another one?
You're saying you wanted to help Matthew?
I thought hiding the body would be the easy way out. But I was wrong. It's haunted me ever since. And I just can't get the image of her lying on that floor out of my head.
Thank you, Mr. Owen.
Mr. Owen, I put it to you that you have bullied and manipulated Matthew Rose ever since you struck the fatal blow that killed Saskia Duncan.
I'm sorry, that's not true.
I'm sorry, Mr. Owen, but when it comes to telling the truth, you can hardly expect to be believed, can you?
Look, I admit that when it comes to this, I have lied.
Only because you have no option but to admit it. Some of your lies have been quite staggering. For example, you're helping Mrs. Fielding look for her sister.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how terrible I felt about that, but I was protecting Matthew.
Would you agree that Saskia Duncan had been making your new life a misery?
Yeah, I would.
She'd vandalized your car, ransacked your flat, ruined your relationship with Melanie Healy.
That's correct.
You must have been running out of patience with her.
I was sick of her. You know, I just wish she'd go away.
I put it to you that when Saskia Duncan burst into your office on Valentine's Day, your patience finally ran out.
You're right. It did.
Whereas Matthew Rose had no motive whatsoever in wanting Saskia Duncan out of the way.
He was trying to stop her from strangling me.
And as my client insists, he was merely trying to pull her off you.
Which is what he should have done. He should never have picked up the ashtray.
Why did you report Matthew Rose as having committed a murder?
Because the state Matt was in. I couldn't see any other way out.
But hadn't Mr. Rose been in a state ever since Miss Duncan's death?
Yeah, because he couldn't cope with what he had done.
So I put it to you again. Why wait to report Matthew Rose as having committed a murder?
I knew Matt was going on the run. I wanted the police to find him before he made things worse for himself.
Or isn't the truth that you were worried that the police had found Miss Duncan's body and were gathering evidence?
That's why I went to find him. To talk him into giving himself up.
I put it to you, Mr. Owen, that you were trying to save your own skin. You were determined to get your lies in first.
That's funny. I thought you were accusing me and Matt of planning these confessions together.
Indeed, which leads me to my next question. Do you not agree it's a coincidence that you both decided to go to the police and say exactly the same thing in the same 24 hours?
Yeah, I suppose it is.
So, what you'd have the jury believe, Mr. Owen, is that at first you didn't report Matthew Rose to the police because you were protecting him. However, you later did report him to the police because you were protecting him.
That's right, yeah. Things had changed.
Yes, they had. Miss Duncan's body had been found and you knew the game was up. I have no more questions.
Captain studied the fracture lines, which, as you will see, extend to the base, vertex, and the side of the skull. On studying the angle of these fractures, I was able to determine where the assailant was positioned.
Which was where?
Well, in my opinion, the fatal blow was struck from behind.
Just so we can be clear about this, you would say that whoever killed Miss Duncan was standing behind her?
Without a doubt.
You would therefore say that as Mr. Owen was in front of Miss Duncan, he couldn't have struck the blow?
The pattern of the fracture would make it almost impossible.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart.
Dr. Stewart, the Crown's pathologist has stated quite clearly that it is impossible to say from where the blow was struck.
Then I beg to differ. My experience tells me otherwise.
What's the matter?
By Almighty God, to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Matthew, what was your first impression on meeting Mr. Owen?
I was very impressed. He had the car, the money, the clothes. I suppose I wanted to be like that.
You wanted to be friends with Mr. Owen?
Definitely. Steve was going places. I wanted him to take me with him.
How were you feeling generally at this time?
Well, my mum and dad had just moved to Leeds. I felt a bit deserted.
Did this contribute to you and Mr. Owen becoming quite close?
Probably. I looked up to Steve.
And how did you feel when Mr. Owen offered you a job?
I was on a high. When we were getting the club ready for the opening night, it felt like we were a team. It was probably the best time of my life.
What was your first impression of Saskia Duncan when you met her?
I liked her at first.
You say at first?
I could see she was trouble. She was too desperate to get Steve back.
What happened when Saskia Duncan turned up at the club on the opening night?
Well, Steve had asked me to watch out for her, but she managed to sneak past me and go into the office.
And how did you feel about that?
I felt like I'd let Steve down. So, I went into the office to see if he was all right.
And what happened when you entered the office?
Saskia was on top of Steve, trying to strangle him. So I grabbed her to pull her off. And she was like a wild animal. And she attacked me and threw me back and then flew at Steve again.
And what did she do to him?
She was trying to strangle him with his tie. He grabbed the ashtray and he hit her. He didn't mean to, it was just a desperate attempt to get her off of him. And that was it, she was dead.
How would you describe your reaction to this?
I can't describe it. 1 minute I was laughing and joking. The next, I'm looking at a dead body.
What did you do when you realised that she was dead?
I couldn't believe it. I grabbed the phone to call the police. But he wouldn't let me.
Mr. Owen stopped you from reporting it? How?
Steve comes across as very, very cool. But there's another side to him. Just underneath the surface. And when he turns nasty...
How nasty was Mr. Owen?
When you've looked up to someone and trusted them and suddenly they turn round to you, as if to say, you're going to be next. It's very frightening.
What was your reaction when Saskia Duncan's body was found?
I couldn't handle it. I just wanted to get away.
Did you tell Mr. Owen this?
Well, to be honest, he caught me trying to steal some money from his office. He closed the door and said I wasn't going anywhere.
What did you think he was going to do?
I thought I'd end up like Saskia on the office floor.
You feared for your life?
I pushed past him and ran out, got Teresa, and left Wolford straight away. I'd let it slip to Steve that she knew about Saskia. I thought he'd kill us both.
Matthew, could you explain why you stole Mr. Owen's credit card?
Because I was desperate for money to get away. He terrified me. He didn't hit me. He's far more clever than that. He kept telling me that if I said anything to anyone, he was going to make sure that I get sent down for life. He told me I wouldn't be able to survive in prison. And by now, I believed him. So I'd do anything to get away.
Thank you, Matthew. I have no more questions.
Mr. Rose, you claim you've been intimidated all along by Mr. Owen?
I don't claim. I was.
Then why didn't you simply move away?
Because Steve wouldn't let me.
Well, Mr. Owen wasn't with you 24 hours a day.
But Wolford was my home.
But I thought you said you felt neglected there, deserted.
I did. But that's where my friends were, my business was.
But didn't you also say you neglected your business and friends?
That doesn't mean I'm going to move away on my own.
If you were so terrified of Mr. Owen, why continue working there?
I had to try something to get through it.
You're saying you tried to get through it by working at the scene of where the killing took place?
Yeah, as if nothing had happened.
But you said that not a day went by that you weren't haunted by Miss Duncan's death.
And sometimes I would pretend that I was all right so that Steve wouldn't get suspicious.
Oh, you pretended?
Yes.
Why did you accept money from Mr. Owen? I shall ask you again. Why did you accept money from Mr. Owen?
It was just easier.
And why did you lie about receiving the money to the police?
I thought it looked bad.
You're right, Mr. Rose. It looks very bad indeed. You see, you say, and I quote, you panicked. You couldn't handle it. You were haunted by it. You lost it. You had to get away. But at the same time, you insisted you never did anything wrong. I put it to you, these are the actions of a guilty man.
I saw it happen. That was enough.
Everything that went wrong. Miss Duncan's death. Falling out with your parents and friends. Stealing. Running away from the police. You say all this was Mr. Owen's fault. You aren't to blame for anything.
It was his fault.
I put it to you, Mr. Rose. Ever since you lost your temper and killed Miss Duncan, knowing the affection Mr. Owen had for you, you manipulated him into protecting you and giving you money.
That's not true.
When he finally refused to do this, you stole his credit card and went on the run.
I was trying to get away from him.
You were trying to get away from justice? Is it not true you were preparing to leave the country? Is it true or not?
Yes, it is.
I have no more questions.
I know I
say that there was a change in Matthew after February the 14th.
Can't say the exact day, but it was round about then.
Round about then, you noticed a change in him?
Definitely. He was miserable, he was drinking, something was wrong.
What did you do about this?
I kept asking him what was the matter.
How did Matthew respond?
He'd say it was nothing and told me to leave him alone. One night in the Vic, he was in quite a bad way.
What do you mean by in quite a bad way?
Upset. He started crying. We were in the loos and it was as if he had something really big to tell me.
What makes you say really big?
Just the way he said he had something to tell me.
And what did Matthew say?
Well, he didn't have the chance because Steve walked in and told me to get out of there.
Did Mr. Owen threaten Matthew?
Not with actual words, but it was obvious that Matthew didn't have a choice.
Before Mr. Owen sent you away, what exactly did Matthew say to you?
The exact words were, it wasn't my fault.
fancy that Matthew's exact words were, "It wasn't my fault."
That's right.
If Matthew Rose had wished to put it across that he had nothing to do with Miss Duncan's death, he might say, "It wasn't me," or "I didn't do it." But to say "it wasn't my fault" suggests that he took part in some sort of action.
No, I'm sorry, you're just twisting it.
I put it to you again. "It wasn't my fault" suggests that he did something that he hadn't meant to do.
It depends on how you say it. Matthew said it wasn't my fault, which definitely meant that he didn't do anything.
If we analyse the exact word...
You can analyse what you want, but you're not going to change my mind.
Not even with reasoned argument?
I was there and I know what he meant.
My lord.
Mr. Mitchell, if you could just answer Miss Mill's questions.
I have done. I swore I'd tell the truth, and I'll say how I saw it, not how she wants me to.
You must listen to what Miss Mills says and then answer to what she specifically asks you.
Yeah, all right. But I still know that Matthew meant that he didn't do anything to Saskia.
You lied! You stood there telling a pack of lies!
Mr. Owen!
He's just one of Matthew's mates, lied to try and get him off!
Mr. Owen, retake your seat. I shall not tell you again.
How can you do this to me? Hey? Why don't you just tell the truth?
Take him down, please.
You know who did it! You've got to tell the truth!
You lying scumbag.
Leave it, Matthew.
After the stunt he pulled yesterday?
Don't worry. The jury aren't stupid.
Makes you wonder how he can sleep at night.
Now, I've actually popped in to tell you we've had some good news.
Do you think it worked in my favour?
Probably. After Jamie Mitchell's performance, we needed it. But let's not try that one again. Make sure you give the jury a few apologetic looks.
I shall hang my head in shame.
These seats don't look very comfortable. It's a good job I brought my cushion. You're going to have a numb backside. Oh, I'm glad I've got an end seat, because then I can nip out for a bag.
We may have quiet in court, please.
Why did you go to Nottingham with Matthew?
Well, Steve found out that I knew about Saskia, and I was afraid that I was going to end up buried in a forest too.
What happened when Mr. Owen found you at your hotel?
Well, Matthew had gone out, and Steve grabbed me and forced me back into the lift and told me to go up to the room.
So, Mr. Owen was aggressive?
Yeah. He started knocking me about and threatening me. And then when Matthew came in, he grabbed him. It was like we were both his prisoners.
What did Mr. Owen say to you both?
He told us that we were going to keep our mouths shut and that he was taking us away.
What was Mr. Rose's manner during all this?
He was terrified. We both were. Steve Frog marched us to the lift and Matthew managed to punch him and we ran away.
Where did you go to?
Back to Walford to see my brother. He's an ex-policeman. Matthew could see that we didn't have any choice. He had to go to the police and own up.
So, Mr. Rose confessed to your brother?
Yeah. He told him everything. I'd say he was relieved. I mean, he was on his way to the police station when he got arrested.
In all the time that you were with Matthew, did he ever say that he'd hit Miss Duncan?
Never. Not even when he was depressed or crying or when he completely lost it. He always said that he was trying to pull Saskia off Steve when Steve hit her with the ashtray.
Thank you, Mr. Marco.
Put it to you, as Matthew Rose's ex-girlfriend, your evidence is hardly impartial.
Then you're wrong.
Why is that, Mr. Marco?
Because after Matthew got arrested, he finished with me. I've been quite upset about it, actually.
Then there's always the possibility you're trying to win him back.
No, you're wrong there too.
Mr. Marco, could you explain why your brother Beppe lost his job with the police force?
He withheld some evidence in a case, but then he resigned.
Which type of case was this?
Attempted murder.
And this is who Matthew wanted advice from before making his confession?
Well, yeah, he owned up. It's not like he was bent copper or nothing.
Oh, of course not, Mr. Marco. In the course of this trial, we've heard from several witnesses how Matthew Rose has a tendency to violence against women.
That's not true.
Then why in his statement to the police would he admit to hitting you?
We didn't realise he did it. He was asleep at the time.
You're saying Matthew Rose managed to hit you in the face and split your lip whilst he was asleep.
He was having a nightmare?
I've no more questions.
I have no questions for the witness, my lord.
Thank you, Mr. Marco. You're free to leave the court.
My lord, before I conclude the case for Mr. Rose's defence, may I, in the light of some very recent information, apply to further cross-examine Dr. Stewart? You stated yesterday, when giving evidence to the court, that Mr. Owen could not have struck the blow that killed Miss Duncan.
That's correct.
That having studied the pattern of the skull fractures, you were convinced that the blow must have been struck from behind. In other words, by Mr. Rose.
In my opinion, that is so.
Now, Dr. Stewart, I've been looking into your professional history, and I believe the last time you gave forensic evidence in court was in July 1989. The Crown versus Flint.
That's right.
Now, although Mr. Flint was convicted, he was subsequently freed on appeal. Now, why was this, Dr. Stewart?
Because the evidence I gave had been called into question.
Well, it was rather more than that, wasn't it, Dr. Stewart? The defense pathologist was able to prove that your methods were unreliable.
Yes. Unfortunately, on that particular case, I made a mistake.
In other words, the forensic evidence you gave to the court was totally discredited.
Yes, it was, but
I have no more questions.
I shall now adjourn early for lunch, after which you will hear closing speeches from counsel, and I shall start my summing up. Thank you.
Mr. Cherry, I need to have a word with you, in private.
My lord, I have requested that the jury remain out of court so that I can make application to call a final witness.
This is rather late in the day, Mr. Cherry.
The witness, Miss Owen, has only just approached me, Your Honour. I believe she holds vital evidence as to why my client did not report Miss Duncan's death to the police.
No doubt, Mr. Wolfe and Miss Mills, you both object?
I do indeed, my lord. We suddenly have a witness forced upon us at this stage.
I object most strongly, my lord.
I shall note, and I must admit I also share your reservations. However, in the interests of justice, I shall allow Miss Owen to give evidence.
How about if we... Jackie!
Mr. Owen, this is your final warning. I will not tolerate any further outbursts in my courtroom. Do you understand?
I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Miss Owen, if you'd like to tell the court who you are.
My name's Jackie Owen. I'm Steve Owen's sister.
During the last adjournment, you approached me as I was leaving court. Why was that?
Couldn't stand by and do nothing. Had to tell the truth about Steve.
If you could explain.
I know why Steve wouldn't have gone to the police. It's because of what happened to my husband, Doug.
Please, go on, Miss Owen.
I first met Doug in 1985. As soon as I introduced him to Steve, they became great friends.
They developed a close relationship?
Yeah. It's the same as how Steve and Matthew's relationship's been described, and only the other way round. Doug was Steve's father figure, mentor.
Well, I believe they worked together.
Yeah. Doug owned a few clubs. Steve ran them for him. It was a very happy time for all three of us. And one night, in 1993, there was a fight at one of the clubs. Some young guy had too much to drink.
What happened?
Doug went to throw him out. The guy pulled a knife. Doug lashed out to protect himself, hit the guy in the wrong place, killed him.
Was your husband prosecuted for this?
Yes. He pleaded guilty in court. Manslaughter. Got 10 years.
How did this affect him?
Doug wasn't a villain. He was a gentle giant. Couldn't handle it. One day he just couldn't take being locked up anymore.
I know this is painful, Miss Owen, but is it true your husband committed suicide?
Killed himself in his cell.
How did Steve react to this?
Same as me. We were devastated.
Would you say that this experience might have influenced Steve's actions in this case?
Definitely. If Steve cared for Matthew, there's no way he'd let him suffer the same fate.
You say he'd fear for Matthew's life in prison?
It's just the same. Doug just lashed out. He hadn't meant to kill anyone. That's why Steve would lie, not report Matthew to the police.
Why would Mr. Owen not have mentioned this?
Protect me, I suppose. He wouldn't want to dredge it all up again.
Thank you, Miss Owen.
Miss Owen, obviously with your giving evidence at this late stage, we do not have an opportunity to look into the events you describe.
I wouldn't lie about my husband killing himself.
I'm sure you wouldn't. However, if Mr. Owen was so devastated by your husband's death in prison, there is the possibility, is there not, that he lied in order to stop himself suffering a similar fate?
It's a possibility. I know my brother. If he had killed Saskia, he'd have held his hand up and admitted it.
Jury, there is no doubt that both defendants were present when Miss Duncan met her death. Both freely admit to this and to their disposing of Miss Duncan's body in Epping Forest. I suggest that you have a number of key issues to consider. The first being, was Saskia Duncan's killing a premeditated act? In other words, did the defendants intend to kill her? You must then ask yourselves as to what the true nature of the defendants' relationship was. Was their relationship, as the prosecution described, so close that each has maintained the other's guilt as a means of hampering justice? If not, then the key to your verdict must be found in which of the defendants you believe. Who you believe will help you to determine if there is only one killer, and if so, who to convict for the crime, be it murder or manslaughter. Should you believe Mr. Owen is innocent and was merely protecting his guilty young protégé out of loyalty? Or should you believe in Mr. Rose's innocence and his being intimidated into silence by the guilty Mr. Owen?
Thank you. Sorry, Steve, but it's no go.
What did Jackie say?
She was very polite about it, but she refuses to come and see you.
Yeah, well, thanks for trying anyway.
Do you want me to sit in with you for a while?
No, I'm fine, thanks.
Right. I'll let you know as soon as I hear anything.
Mr. Cherry. The truth?
The truth is, I'd say it's too close to call.
I must be Jackie. It's got all the flat details in there. If you tell her I need to speak to her about E20 and the health club. This one's for Beppe DeMarco, and this one's for Grant Mitchell. He used to be a Boy Scout. You know how it goes.
Try not to worry.
I wasn't then. I was thinking about Teresa. It was strange seeing her again after all this time.
Yeah. She certainly did her best for you in court.
Must have been hard to admit that I dumped her.
Why didn't you want to see her?
I couldn't tell you now. Will you have a word with her?
Of course I will.
And you say that I was sorry. And that if it all goes okay, I'd like her to come and celebrate with us tonight.
The jury are on their way back in now. See you in a minute.
Come on, Doc, get a move on. Like I'll get the lavatory, haven't I? Oh, good luck, Michael.
Thanks, Peggy.
If the defendants would please rise. If the foreman would please stand. Have you reached verdicts upon which you are all agreed? Please answer yes or no.
No.
Members of the jury, I shall now ask you to retire once more and to continue to try to reach a verdict upon which you all agree. If you are unable to do this, I will accept a verdict on which at least 10 of you agree. Thank you.
Can I have a word?
Yeah, of course.
Matthew's asked me to tell you that he's sorry about what's happened and he'd like to see you later.
What for?
Well, if everything goes okay, We'd like the three of us to go out for a meal to celebrate.
I wouldn't want to get in the way.
No, we both like to be there.
Okay, then.
Thanks, Teresa.
There you go. Matthew wants me to go and celebrate with him. I said I would.
Well, how was it seeing him again?
To tell the truth, I don't know how I feel.
Pleased with yourself, are you?
I'm not pleased about anything.
You lying bitch.
I did not lie. My husband died in prison.
Well, it won't do Steve any good. He'll get found guilty.
If you say so.
He's going to spend the next 20 years rotting in prison.
Will you get out of my way,
Unless
please?
he does the decent thing, like your husband.
Ladies, please. Look, I'm sorry about what happened to Saskia.
Yeah, well, that's big of you.
But if she'd have left Steve alone, then none of this would have happened.
Oh, so it's her fault that Steve killed her.
This isn't going to get anyone anywhere. She was trying to strangle him.
Yeah, well, it's a pity she didn't succeed.
I suggest you return to court. The jury have reached a verdict.
Hey, don't worry. Just stay calm, yeah? I love you, son.
I'm looking forward to this.
Me too, mate.
If the defendants would please rise. If the foreman would please stand. Members of the jury, have at least 10 of you agreed on your verdict?
Yes, we have.
What are your verdicts? Please only answer guilty or not guilty. In respect of Stephen Owen, on the count of murder.
Not guilty.
In respect of Matthew Rose, on the count of murder.
Not guilty.
In respect of Stephen Owen, on the count of manslaughter.
Not guilty.
In respect of Matthew Rose, on the count of manslaughter.
Guilty.
No!